Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Emily Butler. I'm the curator of the Platform Talk series here at Art Toronto. I'm a little bit sad because this is our last talk from the Platform Talk series, but what a beautiful panel to end with. Before we start, I wanted to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. And it is now the home of many First Nations, including Inuit and Métis people. As a newcomer to Canada, I wish to contribute towards truth and reconciliation, and I understand that one of its first steps is a process of learning or relearning. And I hope that the Platform Talks program is a chance to learn together, to think ahead at the challenges in the socio-political landscape, and to think about how we can build a better, more representative and resilient art world together. And I'm so thrilled that we're joined today by 4 experts who will offer insights into the Circumpolar art scene. As this vast region is gaining attention at global art events, including the Venice Biennale, they will reflect on what makes this art scene so compelling. I'm thrilled to welcome Martha Cerny, who's the director of the Museum of Contemporary Circumpolar Art in Bern, Jocelyn Piirainen, who's an artist and associate curator of Indigenous art at the National Gallery of Canada, Laurent Henderson, who's the associate curator, Indigenous art and culture at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, and the panel is moderated by William Huffman, who's the general manager at the West Baffin Cooperative in Kingay. We will have a chance to ask some questions at the end of the panel, but before I hand over to our speakers, please do join me in giving them a very warm round of applause and enjoy.
Thank you very, very much. And just wanted to welcome everybody, and we're at the final panel discussion, so hopefully it will be spectacular, and that you're not too exhausted. I hope you had a chance to spend a lot of time on the floor. Super interesting art fair again this year. Congratulations to Art Toronto. It's 25 years, a quarter century. That's kind of amazing. So to Emily and to Mia and the team, big congratulations on behalf of everybody here. So we're going to be talking about the rise of the circumpolar art scene and taking a deep dive. Once, if you haven't already, do go to the fair floor because Feely Fine Arts, Fazakis Gallery, and Robert Kardosh Gallery all have a really interesting part of that discussion. So certainly visit and you'll see all kinds of interesting content there. My name is William Huffman. I'm with the West Baffin Cooperative. I've been with the organization for about 10 years now, and it is a really terrific Indigenous-owned organization, the oldest and largest Indigenous cooperative in the Arctic, if not Canada. And the forward-facing stuff that we do is certainly our studio program, and I think you're all familiar with the Kinite studio program. But that's really the thing that is the smallest part of the pie. It's also providing essential services in the community. We have a department store, we have fuel delivery, we have rental properties, a small engine repair garage. I've learned about all of this stuff in the last 10 years that I've been there. Not that I really wanted to, but anyhow, small engine repair, very interesting. And so I think that my perspective is one small community of 1,400 people. And yes, we have an understanding of where we're situated in the circumpolar world, but I think our panelists here, I'm not going to do much talking. I'm going to prompt you guys because you have all of the storehouse of information between the three of you of what this looks like. And so why don't we start with introductions? So I'm going to have you, Emily. Yes, I will remember it. And if you could just start giving us a little bit of an intro, who you are, what you do, and then also a bit of an overview of the institution you're affiliated with.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Sorry, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Laurent Henderson, and I was a big fan of the small engine repair shop when I was in Kinite. That was the one place that I wanted to go from the moment we landed. So I am the associate curator of Indigenous art and culture at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, which is just north of us here in Kleinburg. If you haven't had a chance to visit yet, I would highly recommend coming and paying us a visit. We serve great food, and we've got great views and great art. A bit of background on me. So I am a Greenlandic person on my father's side, and on my mother's side, I'm a settler, and I was born here in Ontario. Predominantly, before I was working in museums, my background is very much in social sciences and anthropology before I really got into fine art, which you'll maybe hear a little bit as I talk through some of my practice and some of the ways that I interpret this work. But I was also raised up very much in the Inuit art world and raised almost exclusively on proceeds from Inuit art as the daughter of a carver. So this is something that is very, very deep and personal and exciting for me to talk about, and I can't wait to get into it about this context more of the circumpolar world, especially being a Greenlander and living in diaspora in the south of Canada. And I think there's 1 in 3 Inuit are living in the south now. The population of Greenlanders that are in Canada is 100 or less compared to their diaspora in the south in Denmark, because Greenland is a Danish territory, which is about 18,000. So I'm always excited to get to know other people that are in the field and have vested interest in this as well.
Go ahead, Jocelyn.
Ublukut atira Jocelyn Inuinau Yunga. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jocelyn, and I am Inuk. Is essentially what I just said in my own dialect of Inuinnaqtun. It's still something I'm learning, and I'm usually, whenever I introduce myself now, I definitely try to speak my own dialect. So I am one of these associate curators working at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. I'm with the one of the fairly newish departments within the gallery called the Indigenous Ways and Decolonization Department, where we are responsible really for a lot of the Indigenous content that is displayed, that is on view and kind of in programming and our education department, all throughout the gallery. So it's a huge responsibility. I'm happy to be a part of the team, and it's a growing department of all Indigenous peoples, which is again for a gallery that size is a little bit unprecedented. And I'm happy to say too, I'm one of three full-time Inuit who are working at the gallery as well, which again is a huge thing. So happy to be there, happy to be here speaking about circumpolar art. That's me.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And Martha.
My turn. I'm Martha Cerny. I'm a Canadian-Swiss settler, and settler in both of those countries, actually. My husband and I started acquiring Canadian Inuit art in Switzerland, and we were just very interested through the provenance research in finding out all about the art, but more important, about the artists and what they have to say about their art. And we had the opportunity to make the jump across the Bering Strait from Alaska to Chukotka, which is the far east of Russia, to be working with artists in Ulan in Siberia. So this is 30 years ago we started, and 16 years ago, after a number of exhibitions, to date it's a total of 100 exhibitions that we've done nationally and internationally. I got my master's in curating in Zurich, the Zurich University of the Arts, who had absolutely no idea what I was talking about at the time. And I'm very pleased to communicate that part of my master's work was with Geronimo Inukshuk, a very, very talented musician, DJ. And this has always been our responsibility is, or not responsibility, it is, and our source is going to the source to find out the answers to the questions that we have, and being very inclusive in doing our exhibitions. Yeah, so that's basically, you've been seeing a few of the photos of our museum. And we consider this museum a platform for a dialogue, talking about the perspectives of the past, presents, and futures through the artwork. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Martha. And we're going to go through a couple of group questions, and we're going to, following that, we'll do some more specific inquiry into your specific areas. So Circumpolar, it is certainly big geographically, with a complexity and a richness of diversity. And for the benefit of the audience and me, who may not be as familiar with the context, can you talk a little bit about the circumpolar art scene from your perspectives? And maybe we'll start with you, Jocelyn.
Well, for this panel too, I mean, especially for me as an Inuk, as a part of the Inuit, to me, like what circumpolar is like the indigenous peoples of that circumpolar region is where I'm coming from, and so that's kind of how I was thinking about this this question too, of like how are we defining circumpolar? And yeah, again, as Martha was saying, it to me it really spans across the globe, across the different countries within Europe, Sápmi, the Scandinavian countries, Greenland, then Kalaaleq Nunaat, and then here within North America, within Turtle Island, the northern parts. So it was an interesting way to think about it too, since the circumpolar regions, don't all include just Indigenous peoples. It is a lot of different voices, really. Yeah. So that's how I'm approaching this, is that I'm thinking about it as for this panel, I'm thinking about it as the Indigenous peoples of the circumpolar regions. Yeah.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And Martha, same question to you.
What started for us was realizing the connections, the holistic way of looking at the world, of dealing with the environment in their wherever they happen to be. The environment is basically the same once you get up there to a certain level. It's doing with what you have instead of saying what you need. It's being very innovative. I mean, the people in the Arctic are the first researchers ever in the Arctic, so one has to recognize that. Otherwise, these people would not be alive today. And I think finally, the Western scientists and researchers are realizing the knowledge that is there. And it's like you start with the art and you get into so many different subjects, and there's just so much to learn because of where people are and what they have done with what there is there available to them. Yeah, that's to me the circumpolar area, that similar way of life and that respect for their surroundings, each other, and sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Martha. And Emily.
And I would build off of both of you, because I think what's special about the circumpolar region and circumpolar peoples is this is a place where you're still conceptualizing yourself as being a part of an ecosystem. Whereas I think when we get down sort of in the South, and like I've lived in cities for the past 10 years of my life, there's kind of this binary that we create where there's just like you're on the land or off the land, right? But like in some ways it's not always a binary. Like there's a sense of like, oh, when you're going out on the land, where there is still a sense of there's a sense of responsibility, but it's also it's a sense of responsibility because they're still embedded in the system. And of course too, I don't think about circumpolar regions without thinking about people. We don't do terra nullius here, right? Like they're inextricable concepts from one another. And especially now, I think as the Arctic and circumpolar regions of the world are garnering more and more attention, especially over the last several decades with climate change, that's where people are looking as sort of first early indicators of the way that the world is shifting, and it's affecting circumpolar peoples first. And that will sort of play into a little bit more about what I'll talk about down the line.
Thank you. I think that gave us a lot more clarity on what the circumpolar art scene looks like and what the region itself is all about. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening with the circumpolar creative expression in the world. And we're seeing this, why we're here is to talk about the rise of this in the world. And things like the Venice Biennale. I mean, in the last few installments, just an explosion of this circumpolar perspective, a lot of critical and curatorial acclaim and public attention. So can you talk a little bit about why we might be seeing this and sort of perspective on why this is happening? And Martha, could you start?
Well, I think we were talking about this a bit earlier, communication and availability of the artwork to be able to be shown at these different festivals. Not only the Venice Biennale, I'm thinking of the Adaka Festival, I'm thinking about Bodo, Norway, where there are possibilities for artists to communicate and meet with one another, and also non-Indigenous people like myself, to be able to network with people so that we know what's available and what we can share. Not only exhibit in our museum, but also share with other people of our network, other institutions of our network, because there are different emphasis at different museums, and we always want to get the whole factor in there, which includes the human factor and the people that live there. The other is also in Sápmi, there are the festivals where the Sámi Ridu Ridu is what I'm thinking of, especially, where the Indigenous peoples are taking the initiative upon themselves. Because I remember, I hope I'm not talking too long, cut me off, but in 2003, the Inuit Art Foundation had sponsored a workshop with Siberian artists. They were in Napion at that time, maybe it was just a little bit later, but there was the Siberian Art Fair where there was Anton Mountain and Inuk Trenet, who was in Novosibirsk with us. And I mean, that was like, I don't know what happened, that it just kind of fizzled away. But now there's a super resurgence that has a little bit more meat on the bone, I have to say. And maybe that is because of the communication and the interest. And I have to agree with you, because of climate change. The spotlight is on the Arctic because it's warming 4 times faster than anywhere in the world. And what's in the Arctic doesn't stay there. Yeah.
I was going to jump in with a bit of an anecdote. And I think, Jocelyn, have you been to the studios in Kinnight? Okay, so
not yet.
We'll fix that. And it's only in the last year that we've had high-speed internet. So I've actually, what you're talking about, I kind of saw in real time, because we just couldn't do video conferencing simply because of almost dial-up. So it has transformed not only the way that we're able to communicate from north to south, but also the way that our artists are able to absorb things that are happening in other places. So very interesting observation.
I was just going to say too, like to add on to that, the communication is just so much faster these days. The rise of social media too plays a huge part. Because now, individual artists who want to represent themselves, can just go on Instagram and or Facebook or even create their own website, like with a click of the button, really, and just put themselves out there, which is amazing too. So again, if you have that internet connection. I was thinking back actually to there was a project that National Gallery was involved with last year, and I didn't have a photo of it to provide, but it was called the Indigenous Histories, and this was an exhibition that was actually put on in Sao Paulo. And we were involved to represent the Indigenous artists within Canada, and so this exhibition they involved many others, many other Indigenous communities from across the globe, again including Sápmi. So this exhibition put on in Sao Paulo. This was the first time too that Sami artists were being put on view in these Amazonian countries and regions. And then again, that made me think of Gerald McMaster. He did the Arctic Amazon connection and also the exhibition too. So to me, with those exhibitions and the international aspects, is we're also realizing that the Indigenous communities have so much in common as well. The Circumpolar has so much in common with an Indigenous community, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, or in Gwangju. So yeah, there's also that aspects to it too, where we're relating to all many of these Indigenous issues around climate and around reconciliation, the Circumpolar artists are really kind of coming together as well then, and really rallying too for other artists, Indigenous artists. Yeah.
It is fascinating. And Martha, you may remember this, we did a project, Our People, Our Climate,
yes.
And it was largely an exquisite corpse, a video piece. We had, I think, 6 youth in Nunavut working on this. They submitted their things online. We did this during during pandemic. And what was interesting is we connected with a school in Ecuador, I think. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing to have these young people of Indigenous heritage there dealing with the Inuit youth that we had, and how much of those commonalities were there. I would never have imagined, just based on geography and climate, but really fascinating. And I suppose it also helps when you have these large international forums, having the work from circumpolar regions alongside some of the most famous and most important artists in the world really is, suddenly now we're seeing that discussion can happen more robustly. Yeah. Emily.
Yeah, I think when I was getting ready, I'm thinking a lot about this panel, and one thing that I kept coming back to, well, there's a couple of things, but I'll start with one. And what does the rise of the circumpolar art scene constitute? And because it's just like, well, if you think about it, at what point are we tracing back to this rise? What does that mean? Because circumpolar people have been creating, I always hate saying since time immemorial, because that is becoming such a joke in Indigenous circles. But since time immemorial, we've been creating, whether that's through songs, textiles, tattoos, storytelling. We've had an art tradition that maybe looks different from art traditions that we understand today from a visual arts perspective. And then I was thinking, the last little while, there has been this explosion of circumpolar participation in places like the Venice Biennale, or really, we had Inutek Storch, who represented Denmark this year. Isuma was there in Venice in 2019. But then I even think back, and Jessica McDonald from the Inuit Art Foundation would remember when I was doing work around Expo 67 for an article for the Inuit Art Foundation. But that was such a different time and place because Inuit art was being sort of hijacked, feels too strong of a word, but used to build a national identity for Canada on a global stage. So we had the Ukpik, Inuit words and concepts were being used in the cafe. We had all this kind of this language and symbology that was being used to serve Canada, whereas now the other thing that keeps coming back to mind, and this comes back to my mind in my work all the time. When I was in school, I read a book that was a compilation of post-colonial discourse, and it was called The Empire Writes Back. I think about that several times a week, both the contents of that book, but then also just that idea. Because I think part of the reason we're seeing this massive explosion in representation on the world stage is a combination of the world is very focused on the Arctic, what's happening there right now from a social perspective, from a climate perspective, but also all of a sudden there's an explosion of circumpolar peoples that are in the academy. There were curators, writers, publishers. So we have a lot more say and sway in the way that things get shown to the public in a hyper-public and hyper-visual space such as like the Venice Biennale. So I think that that's really interesting. And then we're being able to see things not just create a national identity or national symbols for a settler state, but oftentimes artists are using this to sort of push back against that narrative. And I have one of the images up here that's been rotating through. It's kind of a curtain of caribou skulls from Marit Ansera. And I think about this when I think about this, like, what do we all have in common? What does a circumpolar art scene mean? And it's important to understand that for a lot of circumpolar artists, especially Inuit, and I know I'm really focusing heavily on Inuit because that's the perspective that I have, there is no circumpolar art scene without social disruption, right? We've experienced colonization and climate change, and a lot of what ties us together is both the cultural similarities from living in similar climates, but also sharing a shared experience of being colonized people. So Marit Ansera, like in Norway, there are really strongly enforced culls of caribou herds. And so you're expected to cull like upwards of 25 to 50% of your caribou, your reindeer, sorry, I'm thinking from a North American perspective, reindeer herds every year to prevent chronic wasting disease, while at the same time, a lot of your rights as a Sami Indigenous person are tied to your ability to have a herd and make almost majority of your income off that herd. And then it comes in with all these other issues where Norway enforces a cull, but Sweden does not. But then these reindeer still cross borders through migratory patterns. So sometimes Norwegian herds are getting overwhelmed by Swedish herds, right? So there's this work that's coming, and then even being at like a Summa in Venice, I'll get into that later. But that work, A Day in the Life of Noah Pikatuk, that was about relocation, right? So we finally have this really strong engine, both of strong artists and then strong Indigenous, circumpolar Indigenous academics, curators, writers, thinkers that are going to help propel that narrative for an Indigenous audience from an Indigenous perspective and not just in service of a colonial perspective. Sorry, that's a bit long-winded.
That's a very good point, and I think it's in a couple of weeks. Inuit Futures in Montreal will take place, and it really is about celebrating and expanding that platform of scholars and academics and curators who have that perspective and have that lineage. So.
Yeah, I'm an alum from Inuit Futures. Shout out Heather Gugliorte for raising up that next generation.
Right.
And so, Emily, we're going to continue with you, and we're going to get a little more specific. So you're working on an upcoming project at McMichael. Basically, it's this fantastic collection of works on paper from Kinnight Studios. The history of the studios is in that vault. So how would you characterize a very hyper-local show from one studio, from one community? How does that participate in this larger circumpolar discussion?
I love this question. I was so excited when I saw this on the draft, and I will try to be as brief as possible so I can just pass it over to you for the rest of the talk. So when I first started, this was the first mission that I came in with when I came onto the McMichael in November of last year, so I've been almost there a year. And I had the enviable and unenviable task of reviewing 90,000 works on paper, which is great, and a beautiful responsibility, but it is a very big responsibility. And that's become a show of 215 works and 48 artists that will open in March next year with a multi-author book. So what's beautiful about this work, and this is another thing I've been reflecting a lot on before this panel, is I like to think of this as generational work. So this is a story that began actually like before I came into existence on this planet, where the entirety, so for reference, the Kinnight Drawings Archive is a collection of 90,000 works that still belongs to West Baffin Co-op and has been held in trust at the McMichael in our vault since 1990. So that came down as a matter to just like, we had vault space, they needed vault space and storage space, and it was brought down with the stipulation that this would be digitized and become like freely and publicly available, which I'm very proud to say, although I had no hand in this whatsoever, that goal was met last year. That work is, 90,000 works are freely and publicly available online through the McMichael website for everyone to view, and there's kind of been this conversation like, oh, this is such a long time coming, but it all sort of played out in its perfect way because the works had to come, and then I think we needed to wait for the sort of technology to develop to do that kind of digitization work, which came through Ed Bertinsky had developed a fabulous new machine that was able to digitize 90,000 works in about a 6-month span. And anyone who works in museums knows that is unheard of. And then there needed to also be this explosion of Indigenous writers and thinkers and curators and architects and designers that were going to be able to contribute to a multi-author book that, that will also be coming along with the show. So when I was looking at these works, and again, I sort of threw a reference at the beginning, like I come from a social science perspective, one thing that kept coming up over and over for me was the human story that was throughout. Because if these are works from between 1959 to 1990, when has there ever been a more intense social transformation for Inuit in recorded history, right? At that time, you're going from being semi-nomadic peoples to coerced into settlements. You're experiencing trade, sometimes for the first time, sometimes it's been going on for a few decades at this time. You're experiencing contact with outsiders and missionaries. At this point, your children are probably being taken to residential school. There's all kinds of, your entire world changes in the span of about a generation. We have 90,000 works. We have a firsthand account from people that are actually going through this experience of complete worldview transformation. So once I started looking at it like a social document, then a story started to come out through that. So I've been able to, I think, because again, I'm conceptualizing this as generational work, and I owe a lot to the curators and the artists and the museum professionals and the conservators and everyone that came before me, I can now set it up in this sort of early, feels like an early interpretation that can be built on for whoever comes after me, and on and on and on and on, so on, because this is 90,000 works. There's going to be a lot more stories to tell beyond the one that I'm just telling, and I'm so excited to see where it rolls on next. And that is all from me, I think.
No, and I certainly appreciate all the work you've been doing and the work that your colleagues have done. When I started with the West Baffin Cooperative about 10 years ago, it was sort of the renaissance of that collection. And not only is it gratifying to see it online and searchable and interactive, but also the emphasis that the museum has spent, that McMichael has spent has had on involving the community. Because again, these stories are important for us to see, certainly, but it's important for a generation or two generations that are in Kinnight to actually reinvest in that history. And so it's a terrific project, and congratulations. Okay, so Jocelyn, you're working at the National Gallery of Canada within that big institutional framework. So can you talk a little bit about, there's obviously a leadership role that the institution has to take in making sure that these creative voices, Indigenous voices, Inuit voices are seen and heard and contemplated alongside all of the other activities that happen at the museum. Can you tell us what really the role you see it as the large institutions contributing to the Circumpolar discussion, and maybe some examples of what the National is doing in that area?
Yeah, no, another really good question that you had too, and so again, my role within the NGC is associate curator with a focus on Inuit art. And like I mentioned at the beginning, our department is a fully Indigenous department. I'm reiterating this only because I'm so proud of it. Again, it's really unprecedented across Canada. It's and it's something that just needs to also be done elsewhere as well. What we're doing too is we're not only looking at the way that we are showing Indigenous works to the public, but also changing things internally through staffing, through policies. Policies like, acquiring works, prioritizing acquiring works, from Indigenous artists. And also, how we acquire the artwork too. Changing those kinds of policies from within, and also the public facing as well. really, my kind of day-to-day job. Of course, it's a huge gallery. There's over 200 plus folks working there day to day, and really my kind of day to day is ensuring that Indigenous voices are being heard in the correct way. Indigenous artists are being heard in the correct way that they would like to have them be, how these artists themselves want to be represented. So some of the kind of really exciting things that have been kind of coming up over the last one big one, especially over the last year, one big change is actually to the Sobey Art Award, where this year they expanded their art award to have 5 shortlisted artists. So they added in this Circumpolar region then to their application, and again that just was an amazing change, I think, since it opened up so many doors then for Inuit artists, for Indigenous artists from the kind of northern Canadian regions then. But then, before that, up to last year, Inuit and those in the north were put together under the Sobey Awards, put together under the Prairie. So it was the Prairie and North categories. So again, this Circumpolar, so separating it then this year, you get more artists then applying through the Circumpolar region category, and then also you get more Prairie artists then. It's more opportunity for Prairie artists. So all around win-win. So yeah, again, that was a really exciting opportunity. So the NGC too will put on the display of the Sobey shortlisted artists each year, on this slide here actually. This is just one little snapshot of the Circumpolar artist that was shortlisted, Takalik Partridge, who is Inuk from Nunavik, and it's an amazing installation. And that's just my own personal bias, really. I don't get to decide who the Sobey winner is, by the way. But so that again, a really exciting new change to that, and the rest of the for the rest of the institution then too. Again, I think it is we do have a responsibility then to show other institutions also like how the way forward in bringing in Indigenous artists, and I feel like it's needed across other institutions within Canada.
Just a couple things for me. I don't think people realize how much of the activities of the department are behind the scenes.
Right, yeah.
And I think a place like the National, I think, is perfectly suited. It's a Crown corporation. It has the heft of being a large institution in Ottawa. So that voice, I think, is important. And so that leadership is vital. You may not know the answer to this question. Is this a unique kind of structure? Is this something that was modeled after something somewhere else? Or is this a completely unique to the National and something we should really be paying attention to for all these other institutions?
I mean, I would say it's unique. Again, I haven't actually come across this before either. And yeah, I would definitely say like it's needed for sure. To have Indigenous peoples, again, there in the institution, and having them, decide, how we want Indigenous peoples to be represented. Then that's such a huge. There's a huge impact there.
And I think we talked about this a little earlier, that you're fundamentally changing language. You're building vocabulary.
No,
And that is such an important thing. I mean, it's always been there in certain areas. Now it's coming out into the mainstream of the institution, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And especially for institutions too that are saying, you know, that they want to decolonize, that they want to have, you know, reconciliatory actions. You know, this is definitely one way, I would say. This is one way to do it, is, you know, listen to the Indigenous peoples. Really take the time. Employ them. You know, my hope is to have many, many, many more Inuit. Again, being an Inuk, of course, I will, you know, want to say that I hope to see many more Inuit within all the institutions across Canada, nationally, internationally. But yeah, many more Indigenous as well.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And moving on to you, Martha. So Museum of Contemporary Circumpolar Art, it's been around for 30 years in Bern, Switzerland, surprisingly in Bern, Switzerland. When I discovered the museum, I was not shocked, but it was just an unlikely discovery in Bern. And so can you talk a little bit about, I guess, you know, what the response is within the European, you know, network? Because you're part of all kinds of other Arctic networks, whether they're education, whether they're other museums or individuals. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and you know, give us a little more information about that?
Actually, the museum has only been around for about 15 years. We started 24 years ago exhibiting, and that was with Inuit participation, Kanakinak Putuguk, Ovalu Tunali on Pakak Inuksuk. We had things, these opportunities just seemed to come to us. And knowing other people, we were able to get the real thing by being able to have Inuit artists help, well, I mean, not help, they were actually doing not only the work, but the designing. We had artworks that could be put in a landscape, and the landscape was designed by these artists on paper. We had other people to do the work too, but the positioning was done. So, like, that's how I started exhibiting, and for me, it was just something totally natural. So that also that's why I had to go on to do my master's as a curator to be recognized in the museum world. Otherwise, I'm just a collector, which is not really where I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to create a platform to hear the voices, to have people listen, and I just want to comment too on Jocelyn's statement. We have interviews. We're writing books with Indigenous participation. We're using some of the quotes for the books. But all the quotes I send back to the artist, because maybe I had that quote a year ago, and I want to make sure that that quote is still valid for that publication. And these are all things that we have to do. Our database is the green slide up there, was done through a great project with mobilizing Inuit cultural heritage. And Jessica Koturk was with us for 3 months. So the setting up of the whole database was done mostly by Jessica, I must say, setting it up. What you don't see, there's a back office there too, where we have the different languages, including Inuktitut, and it is Inuktitut because we had the translation done in Kinkaid, but also in many different languages because we've had exhibitions in Scandinavia, not Finland yet, but in Russia. So it's very important to have the documentation done in those languages. And I must say, when it was done in Northern Sami, I had Frederick Prost, a Sami artist who we know and was also on panel discussions with us. We asked, is the translation okay? because there are translations and translations, and you want to make sure that even when I get a statement from an artist, I also check back sometimes to make sure that I understood that translation properly. The other aspect that I want to mention is because of the database, we get questions for loans. And it's really interesting, some of the questions that we get, because it's not just a loan, it's also a lot of information. And it's some information that I'm not in the position to give that information, so I have to pass it on to an expert in the field. And this is where I also need a little bit of help in working together. And I hope you don't have all the curators in Canada, because that's something that we've been wanting to do for years. And I think possibly maybe even like an internship we could organize or something to give that person access to not only to our network, but we need critical reviewing of things just to make sure we're doing things right and getting that message out right. Because it's, as I was saying, the platform is a space or a platform. This is a platform. Usually we're all in a circle talking, it's to listen. Is to listen and to learn, because the truth and reconciliation questions also have a place in Switzerland because of Switzerland's history with some of its own people. And it's sharing these experiences, learning from one another. First of all, recognizing the problem so that a healing process can even start. But it's being in this together, all working together for that common goal. Yeah.
Thank you, Martha. That was, I think I've been given the 5-minute mark, so I'm going to turn it over to questions from the audience. If anybody has anything they'd like to add, an observation or a question. Anyone? Oh, there we go. And then we'll wrap it up in once.
Thank you. This whole discussion has been great. Thank you very much. I'm especially interested in the National Gallery and Jocelyn's description of the culture change there, the employment change. It's very, very encouraging and inspiring, so thank you for that. I have a question that you might not be able to answer other than in very general terms. And that is that there's been a lot of publicity in the media about the changed culture at the National Gallery. Can you address that in any way?
Yes, as I take a big, deep breath in. Of course, of course it's been quite a lot of publicity, I would say, even within the last, 3-4 years, probably even more, 1 to 3 years even. And some of it can be discouraging. That is for sure. I am the type of person, though, that really does not try to take many of the media to heart. Because again, the media, they are there to kind of, sometimes some media at least are there to really kind of poke at things and really try to, dig up a lot of dirt. So yeah, I try not to be discouraged by the media itself as much as possible. And with the change within the last year of our director, even, I feel like, this last year has definitely seen there's a lot of positive change I'm seeing from within the gallery itself. There's a lot of positive change, and definitely, internally too, we do have our discussions too around what decolonization is, what what does a fully decolonized institution look like, and there isn't really any answers to that just yet either. We don't know that, but we can definitely keep striving towards it. It's it can be a lot, but just my being, I try not to take that too personally and just kind of keep my head down and just keep looking forward. So,
can I add to that briefly? I just want to say you, Ulipika and Renalta, you're literally made history. I don't know anywhere else that has 3 Inuit curators on staff. I think that's pretty much, if not entirely, unheard of. And this is hard. I used the term generational work earlier because this is generational work, right? We've only been, museums were a place that were about us and not for us for a very long time, until really recent generations. And but yeah, I feel you, because I think especially there was a moment in the fall where you do get moments where you're just like, oh, why, this is so big, it's a Goliath, why did we bother? And then it's coming through the other side of that. This is what it's like to be an Indigenous person in institutional worlds, right? And I think the beauty of that is just we're having a conversation here that I don't think would have been had maybe even 15, 20 years ago. And I'm so excited to see in the next ebbs and flows of the next 15, 20 years, what other conversations are going to be had. But I want to say you make history. And I'm so proud to be your colleague.
thank you. I just want to add to that too, just quickly, is that as being a curator at the National Gallery again is for me too. Again, it's just a big, very proud thing, and I do have a lot of responsibility then to the Inuit communities as well. So that as well is kind of an additive stress that it is easier when you do have your fellow Indigenous and other Inuit colleagues too there helping you out. But I'm in it to represent Inuit and make sure that the Inuit artists are really fully represented in a really good way. So I'll finish there.
Thank you very much. And there's a few familiar faces in the crowd, and I just wanted, I'm doing this to you, David. You're my colleague, you've been working at the organization. Any comments based on our conversation?
No.
Perfect. Yeah, David Hannon manages our licensing, royalties, all that stuff on behalf of the artists, in addition to the print collection, all kinds of stuff. So, and how long have you been working with the organization? 15 years. Thank you. And Sarah from the McMichael, any thoughts?
I think there are a lot of people here today, and I'm certainly one of them, my colleague John sitting beside me, who want to be allies of the rising voice of Inuit around the world and in this country we now call Canada. Can you give us advice because there's a room full of people here who are very influential and very on side in a very heartfelt way to help. Can you give us all advice about how to be better allies than we have been and that we are now? Candor, please. Candor, please.
This I think is a good way to wrap up, because we were going to talk about the future. So this could be a very good question. Thanks, Sarah.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, this is it's one of those things that I could say, listen, but the one thing that popped into my head for some reason was share a meal. And I don't really know what that means I know what it means on some levels, but I feel like I'm going to go away and chew on this for a while. Because I think, I don't know why that's what that obviously resonated with you. I think it's I have had this line of thought as I've been doing this show, and as I've also outside of my work with McMichael, I'm a writer and a poet, and I've had this concept kicking around my head of kitchens and cathedrals, and the way that we learn more about each other in the intimacy of like a kitchen table than we're ever going to learn about each other trying to sit in each other's cathedrals, whatever that means. And that's still, of course, like important learning for these big parts of culture, but then just sitting down and creating meaningful relationships, and in what way, we hang out with Inuit. We know how important the meal is. You know my dad. That is the way to each other's hearts and each other's minds, is the kitchen table, and building really like resilient, true, deep relationships beyond the cathedrals. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely listening to whoever is speaking, of course, as we mentioned. But again, I think having Indigenous peoples have more opportunities then. So maybe, I'm trying to think of a way to kind of reword it, but I mean, maybe recognizing too when you need to let an Indigenous voice be heard rather than yourself, I think, is how I want to try to phrase that. Yeah.
I'd like to throw in one extra thing, which is I think allyship also can reside in resourcing Indigenous projects. For better or worse, settler people tend to have their hands on the resources for obvious reasons. And one of the most powerful things you can do is A, get out of the way, as you suggest, which is your point very well taken. And secondly, find the money to make these things happen, because that's very much harder to achieve from an Inuit perspective, unless you're accessing government grant money. But there's a whole world of other kinds of resources that can be brought to, put the wind in the sails of this rising generation of Inuit scholars and artists and writers. So, we love to do that at McMichael, but we're always looking for Emily's candor to tell us how we can do it better. And what I hope for the future for all of us is increasing levels of trust, so that Inuit feel comfortable saying that doesn't feel good, and settler people feel comfortable saying I don't feel understood, and can we start again? Like, I think we have to be courageous in this next generation to find new ways of talking to each other with real openness and trust. And if someone violates your trust, you can tell them so. And we're all grown-ups, and let's do something beautiful together in this next generation.
I'd just like to echo that. It's what I love, doing projects with people, because instead of having a kitchen table, it's projects for me where you get to know people and get to know. You're working for a common goal, but it's also, sometimes I go too fast, and then I have to also step back and listen, and that's what we're there for. Yeah, to listen. Yeah.
Yeah. Eva Raspini said something the other day that has been rolling around my head, which is slow curating, and I didn't get a chance to ask her more about it, but I've just been like adding my own meanings to that. So I'm just like, yeah, we can take our time. We can have good conversations. We can lay good groundwork. And like you said about resources, because fun fact, the last time an impact study was done on the Inuit art, it was worth $87 million of this country's GDP, and that was in 2015. So this is a real engine that deserves real respect and real resources, and Inuit should be the ones making decisions about those resources, for sure. Yeah.
I think those were some amazing closing words. You've done my job for me, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone.